Good afternoon, everyone, from St. Louis in Missouri. I'm going to give a brief talk about how the pandemic has affected Israel's energy sector, or at least the goals for the next 5 years. I'm going to start from the end, from the conclusions. Israel has the Israeli Ministry of Energy has two main goals for the next decade. One is to develop its gas sector. By developing, I mean finding clients to actually buy the gas, getting more companies to look for new gas fields in its exclusive economic zone, and increasing domestic consumption and also competition and lowering the price and creating a domestic gas market in Israel. The second goal that the Ministry of Energy has long-term is to introduce more renewables to the electricity mix to replace coal, but also not to be too dependent on natural gas, because if something happens to one of the few natural gas fields, whether for technical reasons or nefarious reasons, then there needs to be sufficient backup, and that backup would ideally be from renewables. The way that the pandemic has affected these two goals is that they were questionable from the first place. The idea that Israel can actually meet these goals for the next 5 to 10 years, they're even more compromised following the pandemic, and mainly because of the crash in oil and gas prices that the pandemic has caused. So I'm going to show you a few maps to explain what I mean by this and what are the conclusions to draw. So first, it's important to understand that Israel doesn't really have many more countries to export the gas to, and even less so when gas prices are low. So right now, Israel has around 870 billion cubic meters of natural gas reserves. 400 of them are pegged for export. Israel has only managed so far to sell about 30% of the gas it has for exports, 85 BCM to Egypt and 45 to Jordan. So it still has 2/3, most of its gas, to find a client to look for. Now, the Turkish option is kind of off the table for various reasons, political mostly. The second, and kind of the one that was mentioned a lot during this conference, is the East Med pipeline, which hasn't been feasible from the get-go in terms of the economics of it, and definitely in terms of engineering challenges, etc. It is even less feasible when gas prices are so low. So in order to make the East Med pipeline economic, the gas that Israel sells through it to Europe needs to be around, according to different assessments, $7, even $8, depending on how much cost overruns this pipeline will cause. Just for comparison, the spot market for gas in Europe, this is the spot market. Usually it's a higher price than natural gas through long-term contract through pipeline. Even the spot market in the past 2 years has been lower than what Israel can sell the gas to. And definitely since the pandemic, it has gone down from $6.5 2 years ago to $4.9. Now it's $2. The Israeli gas companies, the Israeli and American gas companies, just can't be competitive right now for the European gas market. And so I don't see anyone investing in the East Med pipeline anytime soon. For this reason, Israel has a really big difficulty actually finding private companies to come and look for the gas fields. It's hard enough as is. The domestic gas market is saturated. There's no new customers to actually sell the gas to right now. And there's also a lot of geopolitical problems, right? You can say these problems also exist in Lebanon, but Lebanon managed to get Eni and Total to buy licensing, and Israel couldn't. So there's a lot of geopolitics obviously involved in this, and this makes things even worse because less companies are putting money into new gas exploration. And so Israel doesn't really have anything to expect in the next at least a year or two in terms of getting new companies to come and look. And I would argue in 5 years and more. This is not necessarily a bad thing, because the East Mediterranean needs to stop looking at itself as a gas exporting region, and needs to seriously start looking at itself as a gas consuming region. Most of the gas that's already found and going to be found in the region is going to be consumed domestically. It has to, definitely in the prices that we predict in the next 5 years. And the region is not even close to its potential. Israel with 12 BCM has a lot more potential to use its natural gas for industry, for petrochemicals, for public transportation, but for various regulations and bureaucratic reasons is very, very slow to actually implement it in anything other than electricity. But it can get there and it should get there. Definitely the biggest potential is Egypt. Egypt only consumes 50 BCM of gas. Keep in mind, it has 10 times the population of Israel, but only 5 times its gas consumption. So it has a lot to grow. And that would be, if Egypt actually manages to stabilize economically, that will be the main source of gas consumption in this region. And that's how the region needs to think about it, developing new ways to use its own gas. The second goal that Israel has is to introduce renewables. That's a problem. Israel has a lot to be proud of when it comes to solar. It has these amazing projects going on. Israelis are also early adopters, and they're very quick to install solar PV panels on the rooftops. But even with all of the advancement that Israel has in terms of solar, it's still just 2.4% of its electricity mix. Solar has a lot of way to go when it comes to technology. And in the next few years, it'll be even more difficult because the price of alternatives, of fossil fuels, of oil and natural gas and coal have dropped so low, it makes even less economic sense to put so much money into renewables. Right now, Israel has a goal of 30 by 30, 30% renewables by 2030. Why it came to that number, it's a pretty random number. It's mainly based on the European Union goal of 30% electricity mix from renewables by 2030. The problem is Israel is not in the condition that the European Union is, because the European Union, when it says renewables, it means a bunch of things. It mainly means hydro and wind and biomass. Biomass is just a fancy way of saying burning wood. For some reason, the European burns wood and calls it renewables. Solar, right, even in Germany, the bellwether of renewables, solar is just 7.7% at its peak of the electricity mix in Germany. For the rest of Europe, it's even lower. Solar is just 3.8. Israel, all it has is solar. It doesn't have hydro because hydro is not dependent on technology. It's dependent on geography. And wind. Israel doesn't have a lot of wind, only in the Golan Heights and not a lot of land to do it. So it's mainly solar. And solar is nowhere near 30% of any country's electricity mix with today's technology. And so there's a lot of security advantages in investing in renewables, decentralizing the power grids, et cetera, especially in the context of a missile attack that Israel sometimes finds itself. But 30% is not really a feasible goal, and even less so now that the pandemic has lowered the price of the alternatives of fossil fuels. So these are the main two goals, developing the domestic gas market and developing renewables. Both of them are compromised and will be delayed due to the pandemic. So I'm looking forward to your questions. And again, thank you for having me.